Good evening, almost evening to everyone. Congratulations for making it to the end of your first day at Summit. I've already walked 6.5 miles, so who said you can't get any exercise in Vegas, right? I'm excited I've been working with Brian on this presentation. Well, he's done 98% of the work, but I've overseen it for the last couple of months. So super jazzed to see it come to life here on stage. All about his work at Bloomberg. And he came in from New York, so let's give him a warm welcome. Brian Bobrick.
Hey, how we doing? That's it? Come on, how you doing? I'm from New York. Come on. Help me out here. Hi. My name is Brian Bobrick. I'm the product owner for Jira and Confluence for Bloomberg in New York City. Yeah. First guy throws me right off. Okay. A little bit about my background. I've been doing this for 20 plus years. I'm basically someone that does large-scale project management. My background is a mix of both commercial and military work, so I've done data center rollouts for cable companies, and I've done aircraft carrier upgrades for the US Navy. So I've seen the broad spectrum and a lot of different practices and techniques that people use to manage projects at scale. And I'm currently working at Bloomberg to help the company do the same thing. So this is our agenda today. It's a little overview of what we'll be going through. I'll give you a little background about the company that I'm working for. We'll talk a little bit about the side effects of agility. You know, everybody talks about becoming agile and their journey to becoming agile, but they don't really talk about some of the unintended consequences of actually being agile. We'll talk about the road to scaling. Now, we decided that we needed to put together a scaling framework, and we'll discuss why we decided that and how we went about doing it. I'm going to segue a little bit into business planning, because business planning is one of the key things that our company is based upon and we need to support, and became a very integral part of the model that we put together and we'll be presenting here today. And of course, we'll talk about the framework that we have in place as it stands today and how we got there. And then we'll wrap it up with some final results. So a little bit about the background of Bloomberg. It is about a 40-year-old company, 19,000 employees, 176 locations worldwide. So your typical small startup, right? Not exactly. It's a large, well-established organization. And it's an organization that you would think you would have a hard time rolling out agile practices. This is an older company with built-in practices and process that they've been doing for years. Well, one of the things that Bloomberg is unique about is the culture. It is a very open culture. If you actually come to our offices, you'll see that all of our conference rooms have glass walls. Transparency is something that Mike prides himself in, and he built it into his business. The other thing, you'll notice that there are 4 culture values listed here. Every employee in the company is graded on these values. Innovate, collaborate, know your customer, and above all else, do the right thing. So no matter what your job is or what you're supposed to do, what's really important is that you do the right thing, and you do the right thing for the customer. So if you look at the culture that we're working in, agile practices are kind of a natural extension of our existing culture. You know, so it really wasn't hard for us to go and adopt these practices and put them in place. We began doing that back in 2013. That is when I actually joined the company. Now, I can't take full credit for doing that. I was hired to establish classic project management practices within engineering. Well, after being there for several months, it became very apparent that the way the company operated and the culture that we had, standard project management practices wouldn't fit. They were too dynamic. They needed to change on a dime. Typical projects were not how the company worked. So we decided we're going to go down the Agile route. So we rolled out Agile, we rolled out Jira, and we started doing Scrum and all the other types of practices that you would get with Agile. What happened then was, as this started to become popular throughout the organization, there were some unintended side effects. So what were those unintended side effects? Well, teams went through the normal process of norming, storming, performing, and actually doing very well in their agile practices. But the problem was all of those agile practices didn't correlate back to what everybody knows within the organization as typical business management. Where are the projects? You're talking about sprints. You're talking about story points. Where are the hours? How does this all relate back to how we run the business today? The other thing that happens is as teams get comfortable in their practices, the need to collaborate increases between teams, between organizations, between business units. So that in and of itself necessitates some sort of framework. And that is what led us to the road for scaling. We decided that we needed to implement some sort of framework within our environment to support the scaling and the rollout of Jira throughout the organization. So what we did back in 2016 is we decided we were going to adopt a framework and put it in place on Jira. And this is where we started. At the time, SAFe, which is a Scaled Agile Framework Enterprise, was at version 4.0. So we worked with C Prime, Brad Huffington, if you're in the audience there somewhere. He helped us to actually set this up on Jira. The framework you see here, the SAFe constructs are in red, features, epics, investment themes. Next to them are the Jira pieces that align with that framework. So we started with this framework. We created a new Jira issue type called Initiative. We put all of the epics within one Jira project, and that allowed us to use components as team designators. So when we decided to do PI planning and we assigned a feature to a team, we simply added the component that represented the team. Those components, those epics, those features would appear in the team's backlog, and they would further break down the work into stories and plan them across their sprints. We also added a field called Feature Group. That was meant to kind of like group related features together. It really wasn't part of the SAFe model, but it was something that we found really convenient. We also put all of the initiatives within their own Jira project, and they also had their own workflow. Well, we started with one team, about 3 engineering teams and a product owner, and we put this in place, and we told them to try it. Actually, they volunteered to try it. What we found was that feature management and PI planning was readily accepted. Not only was it readily accepted, it was a repeatable process that everybody was willing to do. One of the reasons was the collaboration. It fostered communication. Here we had product, engineering, testing, all working together on what they were going to do over the course of the next PI. That was a highly successful endeavor. Well, what also happened was that initiatives were not being managed. They were in that project, but it wasn't really something that we did. We didn't dynamically manage initiatives within our environment. It's just something that never happened before, and it really didn't add anything to our internal process. Planning was also, as I said, done consistently, and that was some of the major things that we found. What we also found, some additional things, is that the grouping of features together, people were using that like you would traditionally use a project. The only problem was that there was no place to put any additional metadata. What is that project? Who's running that project? How does that all work? There was no place to accommodate that. PI planning was primarily being done on a quarterly basis. Now, we didn't mandate that. It's just a natural cycle that teams adopted. The impact on individual Scrum teams was negligible. Teams were already grouping their stories together in epics to represent larger pieces of work. All we were doing now was taking those epics and tying them back to what feature and what project that they were related to. So this provided a natural hierarchical roll-up, which again was readily accepted. want to digress a minute and talk a bit about business planning. Now, business planning is a process that every company that I've ever worked at performs. It varies from company to company, but it's the same basic process. Every year, people would get together and they create a plan for the year. They take that plan, they break it down into projects, they manage those projects through whatever means that they use, and then they report and adjust, and at the end of the year, they repeat this process. The other piece of information which is interesting to note is management at different levels requires a different level of granularity. Okay, so the higher you go up in the thing that you're managing, the less amount of detail you really need to manage that thing. And for example, if you look down at the team level, teams are broken into sprints, right? That sprint is typically a 2-week time frame. They use story points, and they repeat that process over and over again. And they're working at the story level, a very fine level of granularity. Well, let's think about the PI planning portion, or quarterly planning as we were doing it. At that level, what we found was most effective was not breaking down the epics at the beginning of the PI planning stage. They would just wanted to know, would this epic fit within a PI? So teams were using swags. They were using some rough level of estimation on the epic in order to do the planning, and then later, when the teams were actually assigned to do the work, they were given the ability to break it down. So again, this was at a higher level, and we're talking about 6 sprints, not 1, but 6. So the time frame gets wider, and the level of detail gets higher. If we take that up another step, and we start looking at projects, how our business is being managed based on these projects, those projects were scoped to quarters. I would start in Q1 of 2019 on some particular initiative or project, and I would end in Q3. This was the level of detail and granularity that was required at that level. So if you take that even higher at the business unit, they were talking about initiatives and things that would happen over the entire year, or possibly many years. You'd get initiatives like MiFID compliance or things of that nature, which would then broken down into projects over several quarters, broken down to feature epics, broken down to stories. So we had this hierarchy, and at each level, there was different levels of detail required. This leads us into our framework. Well, how does this all tie together? What we decided we wanted to do was blend the two processes. We were going to take what worked for our company in the SAFE framework, namely the feature management and the PI planning, and we would go and use that as part of the framework. We would take what didn't fit and change it. Okay, it's a framework. We decided we wanted to adjust it. It worked for us. So we took off the top level of the model. We replaced it with projects, initiatives, plans, and subplans. So at the top of the model, we created a new issue type called project, which contained all the metadata that it needed to define a project. So we no longer used a feature group field. The other thing we started to do is add additional fields that teams needed to do their planning and management. At the epic level, we added a field called quarter, because people were doing quarterly planning. They wanted to specify what quarter they were planning on doing this feature in. At the project level, we had quarter start, quarter end, because that was what was required. Fields that were not used were removed, like weighted shortest job first was not something that was being used by any of these teams. So we removed it. We added the fields that were required, such as the quarter field and quarter start, quarter end. This is what on the left, what the initial SAFE 4.0 framework looked like. This is what the framework looked like after our attempts to align it with our business process. Okay? We'll call this iteration 1. All right? The key here is that this is our first attempt at aligning with a framework that was aligned to our business. So if you notice, it's not a dramatic change here. What we did is we inserted that project level, so now features map to projects for your parent-child relationship, projects map to initiatives, plans, and subplans, all the way up and down the line through a parent-child link relationship within Jira. This quote from Carl Sandburg is one of the ones that I think is most apropos for what happened next. We planned on the framework. What we didn't plan on was some of the unintended consequences. So let's talk a little bit about what those unintended consequences were. Here's our unplanned. What I found out when I started working with these teams, since I did the implementation of the framework, I worked very heavily hand in hand with the teams that were using it. What we found was they were spending 3 to 4 days a month updating a spreadsheet so that they could update their project plans. So some mid-level or high-level engineering person was taking 3 to 4 days every month just so they could update the business plan. Okay, that was eliminated. The other thing was the improvement in the data quality. People were much more confident in what they were reporting to the business because they could go and look in Jira and see how that thing that is being reported in the business tied to the work that the actual teams were doing. We decided that we needed to put in some automation to support this. The teams that were the early adopters on this, they actually entered in Jira project issue types, initiative issue types, and did the linking. So there was a lot of manual entry within Jira. We started to get enhancement requests. Our tool set for program management at the enterprise level was something that's been in place for many years. Now, the management team was looking at this in the new light, trusting the data better, and asking us for additional enhancement requests. We also got enhancement requests from the teams that were using these processes. Can you add additional fields? Can you change things around? This is what the framework looks like today. I guarantee you, if we were all to get together next year, it will look somewhat different because we are continually iterating on this. As you see here now, we still have plans and subplans, but now at the top of the model, we have strategies. We have strategies and goals. This represents the value that that business unit brings to the organization. Under that, we have initiatives. You notice that the word project is removed. Well, one of the reasons is the word project in Jira causes me all kinds of headaches. Okay? It's used in all kinds of places in all the wrong context. So we removed that whole concept of project and we replaced it with this thing called an initiative, which act as the bridge between the value statement defined by the strategy and goal and the actual work that's being done by the teams in the features. And still, we took those features and broke them down and were able to use them within the PI planning framework and distribute them to the teams via components. So a lot of it stayed the same, a lot of it changed. This is our automation at a high level. We have our own internal planning tool that we use for planning and reporting to the senior leadership of the company. What we decided to do is make that the system of the record of truth. So we have one place that always holds the data that's going to be reported to the management committee, and that is mirrored down into Jira via automation in real time. So if you make any changes to our project management, program management planning tool, those changes are reflected down in Jira. And the whole purpose of this is so that teams and business units can align their work now with the model. They no longer have to do the entry. We eliminated all of that with the automation, and they are able to link their epics to the appropriate initiative. Well, what does this do? This provides a hierarchical view up and down from the top level strategy value statement down to the project or initiative level, and then down to the feature level and the individual teams. So if a person is working on an individual story, they are able to go in there and look at the story and see how that story relates to all the rest of the hierarchy within the organization, and at the top level, they could view it down. Now, in order to do that, we added several plugins to the Jira architecture. One of them is Script Runner from Adaptivist. If you look here, we currently have about 4,000 initiatives on the system residing in a Jira project. If I'm trying to link my feature to one of those initiatives, how do I pick it? So what we did is we created this cascading select list, which is based off of behaviors in the script runner product. So we give you a list of all of the plans. There are about, say, 25, 30 different plans that are available. From there, you could pick which sub-plan you're interested in. From there, you can go down to strategy, initiative, etc. When you get down to the very last field here, initiative, and you say, okay, that's the hierarchy I want to link this epic to, I hit the create button, and a link is dynamically created from this epic back to the initiative. That establishes our hierarchy. So you don't have to go in there and do manual linking within Jira. It's all there. We have a listener, again from Script Runner, that's running and watches for changes to that initiative field. So if you decided to relink that to something else, it would make the adjustment. Some of the final results. What you see here is the structure plugin from ALM Works. We rely on this heavily to present and represent the hierarchical nature of this model. So at the top here, you'll see a business plan. Under that, you'll see sub-plans, strategies, all the way down the line. If you look at some of these columns, like status, that is a formula column in structure, which is dynamically generated based off the issue type. So it provides the status based on the issue. So it's not only workflow statuses, which you see represented here for stories and epics, but at the initiative level, we have fields. Is this project on track? Is this project at risk? It's not a workflow, it's a field, but we're able to represent that in a status in that column. We also have the quarter start, quarter end dates, which helps us to drive things like Gantt charts, if I want to show a roadmap of this. And I also have product lead, engineering, and QA, which again are based upon the issue type. These are formula fields in structure, and this is one of the common views that we used to show the hierarchy. Now, if you're familiar with the plugin, if you go to the actual issue type itself, you will see on the issue a structure section on the issue detail view, which will show you this hierarchy of your issue linking all the way back up. The thing that's really cool about this that I like a lot is it's all dynamic. Once we've set up this hierarchy, it's there. The only time it needs to change is if you add another epic to your plan and you need to link it back up. The other thing that we did was we refined our feature management process to have its own workflow. So when PI planning starts, it doesn't start at the to-do state. It starts at an ideation state. I have some feature that I'm thinking that I want. I go and I add it to my backlog of features, and it goes into an ideation state. From there, it moves into refinement. Okay, I'm going to go scope out this thing. How many sprints, how many people and resources do I think I need for this? When it's fully scoped out, it goes into a ready for PI status. That means at some future PI planning session, I could pull this into the plan. From there, it goes to implementation, then to development complete, testing, and finally complete when it's delivered to the customer. So this is our feature management workflow. We also have produced some enhanced reporting. These are some Easy BI reports where you see the status of the PI. Like in this case, you see there's 200 and some odd features. You see which particular status they are in based on where they are in that feature management workflow. We have another report here that breaks things down by release trains. This particular group has 26 engineering teams they're managing on a PI basis, so they break it down into release trains to make it a little easier for them. You'll see a scope change chart here. How many features were added after the PI started, how many were removed, and then some prioritization of those features as a level high to low. Feature tracking, again, we use structure for the tracking of features as we go through the PI. You have a status indicator here that indicates the status of the epic and the stories underneath it. You'll see a tracking field. Again, this is a formula field. It is basically generated based on the date you are looking at this and the date that it was planned and what the current status is. So each feature is either on track, delayed, tracking, and so forth. One of the teams that I work with, for them, they wanted to do kind of like an earned value analysis, percent complete. So they have percent work complete. And what they've done is based on the story points within the epic, they have a roll-up of the story points, which you see here is like 23. For every story that gets completed, they get credit for it. So you see 4, so you have 17% of the work within that epic has been completed. So you get kind of like an earned value analysis. For one team, this was very important, and this is what we put together for them. So what's the final result? The final result here is that we've implemented an automation that supports our business management process. It's not the SAFe framework out of the box. It's the SAFe framework as it works best for us. Our management capability has increased at every level. The teams now have a clear view of how the work they're doing ties to the corporate direction. At the mid-level management level, they are very confident in the entries they make into the senior level reporting tool because they could look in Jira and at any point in time see where these features are that are driving these projects, initiatives, etc. We have full transparency, which again is a very big thing at Bloomberg. So you could look all the way up from the top, all the way down to the bottom, and that view is available to anyone that wants to look at it. And the key here is refinement. As I said, if we come back to this a year from now, I guarantee you it will be different. I have a backlog of feature requests, which I have to continually work on and prioritize myself. So we continue to iterate on this, on the general process and the overall framework. And that's what I've got, folks. I hopefully left a bit of time for questions. Thank you very much.